Imagine a national tragedy. I mean, one that doesn't just shock a country, but leaves this trail. Years of conflicting stories, whispers about evidence being tampered with, and this huge nagging question, what really happened?
Yeah, that's pretty much the backdrop for our deep dive today. We're talking about the Smolensk catastrophe.
Exactly. April 10, 2010. The crash of the Polish Air Force Tu-154M Lux number 101. And today, we're really digging into the 2022 Final Conclusions Report. This is from the Polish Ministry of National Defense's subcommittee, the one set up specifically to reinvestigate the crash.
And our mission really is to unpack what they found, because these findings, they don't just tweak the original story, they fundamentally challenge it.
We're looking at a picture that includes, claims of explosive destructions, allegations of pretty serious evidence tampering, and also how political decisions might have shaped the whole investigation right from the start.
It's more than just an air crash analysis. It's really a story about competing truths, I suppose. The search for answers against this backdrop of, well, geopolitics and intrigue.
And for you listening, this matters because it shows how investigations into these massive events can get really complicated, influenced by outside pressures, how different official reports can tell, frankly, starkly different stories.
We'll get into the technical bits, sure, but also the wider context. Why Poland kept pushing for answers for over a decade. What made it so difficult?
Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with the flight itself, the plane, the people on board. Just how significant was this?
Okay, so the aircraft. A Tupolev Tu-154M Lux, number 101, serial number 90A837, built in 1990. And the report is very clear on this point. Its service life hadn't been exceeded.
So not an issue of an old, worn-out plane, at least officially.
Not according to its lifespan, no. And this was a Polish Air Force VIP transport. It was flying under head status. That's the designation for carrying the absolute most important people in the country. Think Air Force One equivalent protocols, essentially.
And the delegation. It's just staggering when you list them. 96 people. President Lech Kaczyński, his wife Maria Kaczyńska, the former president in exile, Ryszard Kaczorowski.
And to the chief of the general staff, General Franciszek Gogor, commanders of all the armed forces, branches, MPs, senators, other key figures.
All heading to Katyn for the 70th anniversary of the Katyn massacre, an event already loaded with historical weight, especially in Polish-Russian relations.
A hugely symbolic, almost sacred trip for Poland. And then the outcome. At 6:41 UTC, April 10th, 2010, near Smolensk North Airport, the plane is just obliterated.
Completely destroyed. Wreckage scattered over 500 meters. No survivors.
Nah.
Zero.
So a modern VIP plane, top leadership, critical mission, total destruction. I mean, the questions start immediately, don't they? It pushes beyond just accident.
Absolutely. And this is where the subcommittee's report gets really concerning. It points to the aircraft's overhaul just before the crash.
Tell us about that.
Right. So the overhaul contract was awarded in April 2009 to a consortium, Polit Electronic and MOW Telecom International.
Okay.
Now, the subcommittee report highlights that Polit Electronic, well, it represented Russian industry interests, an intermediary basically for post-communist countries. And the actual work was done in Russia.
In Samara by a company called Aviator. And here's the kicker. Polish military intelligence apparently confirmed Aviator had ties to Vladimir Putin, who was prime minister then.
Wow. So direct links to the top of the Russian government. Were warnings raised?
Explicitly. The report mentions Minister Alexander Grad warned the defense minister, Bogdan Klesh, saying, and I'm quoting roughly, that entrusting Aviator could lead to a catastrophe.
A direct warning. Catastrophe.
Yes. But despite this, and despite knowing about these connections, the report says no Polish Secret Service seemed to question the consortium's credibility, even knowing about links to old communist services.
That seems negligent, to put it mildly.
The subcommittee certainly implies that, and it gets worse. After this overhaul, the plane had numerous problems. Faults in key systems, like the ABSU flight control system.
Critical systems.
Very critical. And some fixes involved swapping parts with the sister aircraft, the Tu-154M number 102, which isn't exactly ideal for a VIP plane.
No. And wasn't there something about an emergency beacon?
Yes, this is crucial. The ARM-406P emergency radio. Designed specifically to transmit the crash time and location, it was switched off.
Switched off. Why?
The official reason given was interference with GPS receivers. But the subcommittee, well, they see this as part of a larger pattern.
What's their conclusion on all this overhaul stuff?
They conclude that all these factors, the Russian overhaul, the ignored warnings, the post-overhaul faults, disabling the beacon, It basically allowed Russian special services to gain, and this is their phrase, full control over the fate of Tu-154M and the subsequent investigation.
Full control. That's a massive claim. It suggests potential foreign influence before the crash even happened.
That's exactly what the subcommittee is arguing, that the vulnerabilities were systemic and potentially exploited.
Okay, so we have these serious concerns about the plane itself before it even took off.
Yeah.
What about the situation on the ground at Smolensk Airport?
Right, Smolensk North, XUBS. It was a Russian military airport, specifically transport aviation forces. But interestingly, the Tu-154M flight, despite being a military plane, was operating under civil aviation rules.
So civil rules, but military airport, military controllers.
Well, the overall flight was overseen by the main air traffic control in Moscow, the GCORL. But the local control, the direct instructions, came from the air traffic control group, the GKL, at Smolensk North.
And how was that operation run?
Not well, according to the subcommittee. They documented shortcomings in the staff's preparation. Descriptions from the report paint a picture of the control tower. Great deal of nervousness, controllers acting chaotically, using vulgar language.
Chaos in the tower for a head-of-state flight. That's alarming.
It is. And the report also notes the presence of an unauthorized person, a Colonel Krasnokutsky, a senior ground operations officer who was apparently giving orders, adding to the confusion.
And it went beyond just chaos, right? There was misleading information.
Yes. Eltin Kern Plusnin, one of the controllers, he apparently admitted later that he intentionally gave the Polish crew false visibility data. Said it was 400 meters when the meteorologist had actually reported 800 meters.
Why would he do that?
He claimed it was to dissuade the Polish pilots from the approach, to basically scare them off from trying to land.
But why not just say the airport's closed or conditions are below minimums? Why lie?
That's a key question the report raises. It seems unnecessarily deceptive if safety was the only concern. And then there's the issue of alternate airports.
The Polish pilots had backups in mind.
They initially suggested Vitebsk or Minsk. Pretty standard procedure. But Moscow Control, the GCORL, rejected those. They pushed for Moscow airports instead.
Further away.
Much further. And they claimed this was based on some prior agreement with Warsaw. But crucially, the report states the Polish pilots hadn't been told about any such agreement.
So the crew is in the dark about this supposed plan.
Seems so. And the subcommittee also points to conversations recorded between the Russian controllers suggesting a plan. The plan was apparently for the Tu-154M to make a controlled approach towards Smolensk, but then specifically go around and head to an alternate airport.
Implying they never intended for it to land there at all.
That's the implication the subcommittee draws. That the landing was never really on the table from the Russian ATC perspective, regardless of what the Polish crew thought they were doing.
Which brings us to the crash itself. And this is where the subcommittee report makes its most explosive claim, literally.
Yes. This is their core finding. They state the Tu-154M was, and I quote, completely destroyed following an explosion at 6.41 UTC. They are explicit. The real cause of the Smolensk crash was 2 explosions in the final phase of the flight.
2 explosions. This completely overturns the earlier narratives, especially the one about hitting a birch tree, right?
Absolutely. The famous Bowden birch tree theory. The subcommittee says, no, the plane did not hit that tree with its left wing first. Instead, their analysis of the cockpit voice recorder picked up a muffled explosion sound. Over 100 meters before the plane would have reached the birch tree, at 06.40.55 UTC. This timing is critical because it suggests the catastrophic event began before any impact with obstacles on the ground.
So what did this first explosion do, according to the report?
It was devastating. It apparently severed almost 6 meters of the left wing tip, destroyed a section called the number 22 slot, and parts of the upper skin. This immediately caused the aircraft to roll hard to the left.
Uncontrollably.
The autopilot tried to correct, but the damage was too severe. The structural integrity was compromised.
And the second explosion?
That came about 6 seconds later, near 06.41.01 UTC. This one was several meters above the ground, and it happened in the left center wing area.
And the effect of that one?
Massive destruction. It essentially blew off the entire tail section, including the pressure bulkhead. The rear fuselage roof was torn open, the sides bent outwards. It was a catastrophic structural failure mid-air.
You mentioned a door earlier.
Yes, passenger door number 823. It was found driven 1 meter deep into the earth at the crash site. The force required to do that. It's immense. Far more than you'd expect from just hitting the ground.
Okay, so the claim is explosions. What forensic evidence does the subcommittee cite to back this up? Because that's a huge shift.
It is, and they point to several lines of forensic evidence. First, lab analyses, done both by the Central Police Forensic Laboratory in Poland and, significantly, an independent lab in Kent in the UK.
And what did they find?
They confirmed the presence of high explosives residue, specifically TNT RDX, which is hexogen, and PTN, pentrit, found on fragments of the wreckage and even on passenger seats.
Military-grade explosives.
Yes, compounds used in demolitions. Not things you typically find after a normal plane crash fire involving jet fuel.
Okay, what else? The human remains.
This is quite grim, but crucial to their argument. Medical analyses reportedly showed fragmentation of the body inadequate for the conditions of an air crash, meaning the injuries were different, more severe or specific than a typical impact.
Like what?
They mentioned bevel-shaped damage to the bone caused by a passage of a foreign object at large velocity, like a bullet or shrapnel. That suggests high-speed projectiles involved.
Consistent with an explosion.
That's the argument. Also, burns. At least 2 victims reportedly had radiation-type burns, described as from the heat of the blast itself, which occurred before their clothing was torn off.
So intense heat first, then the physical force.
Exactly, which again fits an explosion pattern. One crew member had wounds with charred edges, suggesting direct fire exposure while still in the aircraft, and was found away from the main ground fire areas.
Anything else from the medical side?
They mention a small steel ball bearing, just a few millimeters across, found embedded deep in a victim's knee joint. It had penetrated at very high speed, requiring significant force again, suggesting an explosive event. Plus, fragments of rivets and other small aircraft parts were found embedded in bodies.
And the wreckage itself? Did it show signs beyond just impact?
The subcommittee says yes. Their analysis pointed to things like characteristic post-explosion curls in the metal and something called recalibrated holes, where rivet heads were apparently squeezed through the metal skin by intense pressure. Patterns, they argue, are inconsistent with just hitting the ground.
What about the engines?
The left engine, which was the most damaged, reportedly failed about 1 to 1.5 seconds before the main impact while the plane was still airborne. Another indicator, they say, that the destruction started before hitting the ground.
Okay, so compelling forensic arguments presented by the subcommittee. But if this is the case, what about the initial investigation? Why didn't it find this? This leads to the allegations of evidence tampering, doesn't it?
Precisely. The subcommittee report alleges significant issues with how the evidence was handled right from the start, particularly the flight recorders, the black boxes.
What happened with those?
According to the report, Russian authorities immediately took control of all of them, CVR, FDR, the works. They reportedly read out the data without full Polish participation or even proper authorization. Polish officials on site were apparently denied access to secure the boxes themselves.
That sounds highly irregular for an international investigation.
It's a major breach of standard protocols, absolutely, and it immediately raises red flags about the integrity of that initial data. The subcommittee goes further with the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, specifically the Mars BM type used.
What do they claim about the CVR?
Phonoscopic analysis, basically a detailed sound analysis, revealed what they call tampering. They cite several things: an inserted fragment, about 23.8 seconds long, marked by a sudden spike in noise level.
Inserted, like edited in.
That's the allegation. Also, editing differences between copies made at different times, comparing a June copy to the original April copy, showed changes. And physical evidence on the tape itself, like tape folding, that they say isn't consistent with how the Mars BM recorder actually works, suggesting it might have been manipulated on a different machine.
And the tape quality.
Reported as not in accordance with the specification of the producer. All pointing, in the subcommittee's view, towards deliberate manipulation of the CVR recording.
What about the flight data recorder, the FDR, the one that tracks the plane's parameters?
Issues there, too. The report states only 44 data channels were available from the FDR. Critical parameters were missing, things like vertical acceleration, ground speed, GPS coordinates, even the left aileron deflection.
Why is that significant?
It's a violation of ISAGO international standards. These parameters are crucial for accurately reconstructing the flight's final moments. And the initial Russian MAK report apparently offered no explanation for why this key data was missing.
So recorders compromised. What about the physical wreckage?
Allegations there, too. The subcommittee claims Russian investigators omitted certain debris from the scene reports, like parts of the horizontal stabilizer, that they cut off parts of the fuselage roof and even moved wreckage fragments around the site.
Why would they move wreckage?
It's unclear, but it disrupts the debris field analysis, which is crucial for understanding the sequence of destruction. They also note a change made by the Russian side to the recorded flap angle from 36 degrees to 45 degrees after the crash, which the subcommittee says wasn't justified for analytical reasons. It all contributes to this picture of controlled evidence.
If the physical evidence and the recorders are potentially compromised, how else can you verify what happened? Simulations.
Exactly. And this is another key part of the subcommittee's report. They commissioned independent scientific analysis, specifically numerical reconstructions and simulations from the National Institute for Aviation Research, NIAR, in the U.S.
An independent U.S. institute. What did NIR find?
Their findings were pretty damning for the official Russian, MA, and earlier Polish Miller Commission reports. And IRR ran simulations using the parameters from those reports, like the idea of the wing hitting the birch tree at a specific height, around 5 meters.
And did the simulation match the crash site?
Not at all. The NIR simulations predicted a completely different impact location and final position of the aircraft on the ground. The pattern of structural disintegration in the simulation also didn't match what was actually observed.
So the official story just doesn't compute scientifically.
According to NIR simulations, no, it doesn't hold up. Furthermore, the simulations showed that a simple ground impact, even a severe one, just couldn't explain the observed debris scatter fragments being thrown dozens of meters sideways.
Or the door driven a meter into the ground.
Precisely. That door required, according to NIR's calculations, something like 100 times more kinetic energy than a conventional crash impact could provide. Only something like an explosion could generate that kind of localized force.
Did they look at the vegetation too? The famous birch tree.
Yes. NIR's analysis of the vegetation at the site indicated it was mostly dense, bushy willow and poplar, with trunks generally no thicker than 10-12 centimeters in diameter.
Not exactly sturdy enough to shear off a large section of the Tu-154 wing.
Highly unlikely, according to their analysis. It contradicts the idea that hitting those trees initiated the catastrophic wing failure described in the earlier reports. So these independent simulations strongly back the subcommittee's explosion theory and challenge the previous findings on scientific grounds.
This all paints a very complex, very troubling picture. And it seems impossible to separate the technical findings from the political context, doesn't it? The subcommittee certainly doesn't shy away from that.
No, they definitely don't. They put a lot of focus on the political and administrative decisions made in Poland before and immediately after the crash. A central point is the choice of legal framework for the investigation. There was a 1993 agreement between Poland and Russia specifically designed to cover incidents involving military aircraft. The subcommittee highlights that Prime Minister Donald Tusk's administration chose not to use this agreement.
What did they use instead?
They opted to apply Annex 13 of the Chicago Convention, which governs investigations into civil aviation accidents.
Even though this was a military plane on a state mission.
Yes. And according to the subcommittee, this decision had huge, immediate negative consequences for Poland's role in the investigation.
What kind of consequences?
They argue it essentially released the Russian Commission from the obligation to cooperate meaningfully with the Polish investigators under the terms the military agreement might have mandated. It effectively downgraded the Polish Commission's status.
Making them less of an equal partner.
Exactly. The Polish report became, in effect, just an internal report with no official international standing under the Annex 13 framework chosen. This severely hampered Poland's ability to formally challenge the Russian findings or make legal arguments internationally.
So that legal choice right at the start basically tied Poland's hands.
That's the subcommittee's argument. And they claim this led directly to the Polish side being systematically denied effective participation, refused access to recorder readouts, proper visual inspections, questioning of the Russian controllers, even crucial autopsy protocols.
You mentioned autopsies. There were issues there.
The subcommittee makes the very serious allegation of potential substitution of bodies, claiming autopsies were performed without Polish experts present, leading to confusion and uncertainty later on.
Chilling. And the subcommittee links this back to the Polish government at the time.
Explicitly, they state that Russian special services gained total control, that phrase, again, over the overhaul, the visit prep, the flight, the investigation, even the media narrative. And they conclude, quite bluntly, that this would not have been possible without the decision, or at least the approval, of Prime Minister Donald Tusk, citing his constitutional responsibility for the services.
That's a direct accusation of, at minimum, enabling this situation through specific decisions.
Yes. The report lists a series of actions or inactions by the Tusk administration that they label negligence and conscious actions,
How, Jess?
entrusting the overhaul to Aviacorps despite those high-level warnings, involving former Soviet intelligence figures in the Cotton visit preparations, holding secret talks with a top Russian official, Ushakov, who supervised special services for Putin regarding the visit,
What else?
disregarding an Interpol warning about a potential terrorist threat against planes flying from EU capitals to Russia on that specific day, April 10th. Failing to inform President Kaczynski about alleged Russian efforts to potentially block his participation in the Cotton ceremonies.
And related to the flight path itself.
Allowing the Tu-154M to be directed towards a landing corridor at Smolensk that had reportedly been closed for 6 months, and a failure to properly inform Smolensk airport control about the flight's departure from Warsaw.
So a whole catalog of alleged failures and questionable decisions.
Yes, and the subcommittee's final word on this is stark. Without these decisions, the Smolensk drama would not have happened. They place significant responsibility on the administrative and political choices made in Warsaw.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. Our deep dive into this 2022 subcommittee report reveals a narrative starkly different from the initial official accounts. We have compelling arguments, backed by their analysis of forensics and independent simulations, pointing towards two distinct explosions causing the crash, not a simple collision with terrain or trees.
Right. Evidence cited includes traces of high explosives like TNT and RDX, unusual shrapnel-like injuries, and specific burn patterns on victims, documented irregularities, and alleged tampering with both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. And simulations that show the earlier crash scenarios just don't physically add up.
And layered on top of this technical analysis is a profound critique of the political and administrative handling of the situation. The choice of legal framework, the controversial overhaul process, the alleged enabling of foreign control, and the systematic denial of access for Polish investigators.
It really underscores how the investigation itself became part of the controversy. The subcommittee argues that key decisions made by the Polish government at the time directly contributed to the Russians gaining control over the process and, consequently, the narrative.
So what does this all mean? Looking beyond Smolensk itself, this story really highlights the immense difficulty in finding objective truth when national interests, historical sensitivities, and geopolitical tensions collide so forcefully. How transparent can any investigation truly be under such circumstances?
That's the core question, isn't it? If the integrity of crucial evidence like black boxes and autopsy reports and the very framework of an investigation can be allegedly compromised to this extent in such a high-profile international incident involving a head of state.
What does that tell us about our ability to understand other major historical events where powerful states might have conflicting interests or narratives? Are the mechanisms we have in place robust enough to guarantee independence and transparency when the stakes are this high?
Or is the pursuit of truth sometimes inevitably sacrificed to political expediency, diplomatic maneuvering, or simply the desire to avoid even greater conflict? It's a deeply unsettling thought.
Definitely something to mull over. How much of the accepted history of sensitive events is shaped not just by the facts, but by who gets to control the investigation and the narrative?